Forget all you know about podcasts. We welcome you to an experience uniquely different. Please join us for our coverage of all entertainment on the fringe of society. The candles are lit, the lights are down low. It is now time to welcome our host as he steps up to the pulpit. The sacrifice has been prepared for the midnight black mass.
Ghastly greetings, groovy ghoulies, and welcome to another edition of the Midnight Black Mass. I am your host, the devil you know, the maniacal minister of the occult, the Reverend Dan Wilson, alongside my tag team partner, the man himself, the 2014 GeorgiaWrestlingHistory.com Matchmaker of the Year, and the current commissioner of Empire Wrestling, Mr. Andrew Alexander.
D's Nuts for President 2016.
Hey, D's Nuts is making a strong contendership for the presidency out of nowhere. He's a real dark horse candidate.
Man, if you would have told me when I was a youth that I would have lived to see an African-American president elected, I'd do it. No way. And then if you'd have told me that possibly a woman was going to be elected, I would have said, no way. And then if you would have said maybe D's Nuts will become president, I would have said, yeah, that sounds about right.
Well, that's, yeah. Compared to some of the other candidates, he seems like a fucking Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah, he's got my vote. I mean, I don't vote. But if I did, it would be D's Nuts all the way.
Well, it looks like he's got Kentucky on lockdown, so we'll see what happens. It should be very interesting. What would the country do if the D's Nuts guys stood up and said, no, for real, I'm running?
Man, he might have a chance.
I mean, if fucking Donald Trump's got a chance, he's got a chance.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about him. Like, he's probably going to win, right? I mean, I don't keep up with politics, but maybe I should start. It sounds interesting at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he's enough of an asshole that people will probably vote for him, so we'll see what happens.
I just want gas to be under $2 a gallon. I don't give a fuck what they do other than that.
Amen. Looks to be heading that way, so that's good. So how was your week?
Man, pretty good. Uneventful, but, you know, that no news is sometimes good news, so, you know, we're just hanging in there. What's going on with you?
Hey, one of my favorite pastimes is nothing. So, and I don't get to do nothing quite near as often as I would like to. But this past week, I actually finally, after years of searching, because, you know, the book is out of print, it's actually like $1,500 a copy to get a paper copy of it now. So got my hot little hands on a copy of the Gary Hart autobiography. One of the great wrestling managers of all time and great bookers of all time, really, as well. And you know, one of the most unique perspectives on the business. He didn't grow up. He was a wrestling fan, but he kind of got broke into business. He was a kid from the streets of Chicago, and he was actually like running jobs for the mob up there in Chicago. And, you know, ended up with some wrestling people that way and kind of left that lifestyle and went on to professional wrestling. He was a real no-nonsense kind of guy. He was a professional wrestler first. He had just an amazingly interesting life. Of course, he was most well-known for his tenure in World Class Championship Wrestling, where he was the booker during their great period of success in the 80s when they were perhaps the hottest territory in the country. And, you know, he had a real unique insight on that whole situation and kind of some sides of stories that you may have never heard before. Like the story with him cutting up the missing link with a razor blade is one of my absolute favorite fucking stories ever in wrestling, where basically the missing link tried to jump him in the locker room when he was the booker. So it was like apparently it was a scheme from these other guys that were coming in, Ken Mantell, who was like his rival booker there, trying to basically run him out. And the missing link fucking jumped him in the locker room, and he'd been in that horrible plane crash that killed Bobby Shane and crippled Johnny Valentine, and so he was all fucked up from that. Still, this is why he never took any bumps, in his later years as a manager. And he got blindsided by the Link, and so he couldn't really beat him in a fair fight. The missing Link was this huge fucking hulk of a guy, ripped to shreds, and he pulled out old Betsy, his fucking straight razor, out of his fucking wallet and carved that motherfucker to bits.
Man, and there must have been some real shit going on because, I'm a booker, and I've never gotten jumped, and, the average person would consider me a real asshole, so maybe I need to start carrying me a straight razor.
Yeah, it's a Bible in many ways for a booker and a manager, that book is. It really goes into great detail.
I really need to check it out. I've got my hands on a digital copy, but man, it's just I can't read that stuff. It just gives me a headache. I need to maybe just trying to find a way at least get through that one because I've heard just amazing things about it, and definitely heard it put over as one of the best wrestling related books ever made. It really seems like, I hate when things get re-released and kind of hurt the value overall, but it seems like that company would, put out a second edition of some kind, and hopefully a lot of the value would still be there for the original printing, but it seems like they would do something, seeing the popularity and seeing that book's selling for, like you said, over $1,000. Seems like they would put it out there.
Yeah, people want it, and unfortunately he passed away just like 2 years or less after the book came out. So, it's not like there's a sequel coming, and there's not like he's there to get that knowledge from anymore. So it's kind of like his last will and testament, just talking about his whole time in the wrestling business, and he really goes into detail about his booking philosophies and his managing philosophies, and it's very different than the norm, and he has some opinions on some guys that are quite different than what you normally expect. Like, he fucking hated Sting and Lex Luger, like talking about trying to work with them when he had the Muda and Terry Funk, and like how difficult that was, and like he also like he had a no fucking bullshit basically attitude or clause in his relationships with his talent. He would ride or die with them all the way as long as business was going good. But, if they fucking second-guessed him or, went against his wishes, he would go the fuck on and go somewhere else. He's like, if you don't have faith in what I'm trying to fucking get over, then, what am I doing here?
Hey, that's exactly what I like to hear. It sounds like my type of guy all the way.
Just like,
yeah, that I've heard some stories about Lex Luger. Who knows what's true and what's not, but don't hear a lot of stories about Sting in a negative light. Just he always seemed kind of a laid back, easygoing type of guy. So that would definitely be interesting just there to hear. And maybe that's one of those situations where you're guilty by association. But yeah, it sounds awesome. I need to do something and break down and at least read through it one time, even if I have to torture and read it on my phone or something.
Yeah, it's not so like if you really dig into it, you could probably read it in a day. It's like 288 pages. It's not like a giant book, but it's very, very good.
Yeah, I definitely need to check that out. If it got you to read, it's got to be pretty good.
Oh, yeah, like I don't fucking read.
Your comic books where you look at the pictures.
I read real books, too. They're usually wrestling or, some heavy metal autobiography, but I occasionally delve outside of that and read other shit, too.
How do you think things would have been if Gary Hart was in the Fed back in the day? What if Gary Hart was the manager of the Hart Foundation? I wonder how different that run would have been. That would have been very interesting. They
actually brought him in for a tryout, and they kind of treated him like a jabroni. And at the time, he was a really big fucking deal and had drawn a lot of money all over the country. And when he came in, apparently, like Chief Jay Strongbow was in charge of him and was still pissed off at him for getting fired by Gary Hart in Texas. And so they fucking set him up to fail. Like, they told him to go meet the guy he was supposed to manage, which was this green fucker from, like, Brazil or something. He was just a big monster. And they told him to go meet him at the airport, and he went, and he wasn't fucking there. So he got his flight delayed, and he got there, and the motherfucker was at the building. They were just going to try to send him out without him, as Strongbow was trying to fucking put the sabotage on him. So he walked in their locker room and told them all to go fuck themselves and left.
Wow. That's a good little segue there, mentioning the Hart Foundation. I'm sure we're going to talk about them a little bit on this week's episode. But real quick, I went to a little concert this past week, Cheap Trick and Peter Frampton in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh.
And
How was that?
I'll tell you what, man, there's a new amphitheater up there. I haven't looked up. I meant to, and I forgot, but I did hear it was new. But it's a new amphitheater called I'm going to have to look it up, man. I'll look it up in there in just a little bit. But it's a new amphitheater in Nashville. Ascend Amphitheater. And it's in downtown Nashville. It's pretty close. You can see where the Titan Stadium, you can see it from there. And it's kind of right in the thick of things. Man, I'm not joking. I've been to a couple venues, in the Southeast to watch some concerts. It is the best place I've ever seen a concert at. By far, there's no close second. Especially for the amphitheater setting, which I prefer. I like the smaller, things. I mean, it's definitely cool when you go to a stadium show or a big arena, but those small settings are always kind of nice, and that's one of the pros of kind of liking a lot of the older bands like me and you like is, a lot of them are playing the smaller venues instead of the arenas. But this place, man, it wasn't too big. I would say it's quite a bit smaller than like a Aaron's Amphitheater in Atlanta, which I've been to, dozens of times, which is where we've seen Tesla and Styx and Def Leppard just a few weeks ago. But it's a little bit smaller than that. It's brand new, so it's still super clean, awesome bathrooms, nice concessions. It had this really laid-back feel. Plus, even though I had tickets, which were very affordable, and most of the tickets I've seen for upcoming shows are, pretty affordable as well. There's a building across the street. I want to say it's a large apartment building, but I could be wrong. But there's a pretty decent, lot connected to it. And I only saw, I'd like to keep this a smaller secret, so hopefully our listeners don't bum rush it and get it shut down. But I saw about 3 or 4 people walking over there with lawn chairs, and they just sit in this lot, and it's just across the street from the place in this little fenced-in area. And you can sit there, and you may not see the show that great, but you can hear the show perfectly, absolutely free of charge. Yeah. It was just an awesome setup. I was really impressed. Definitely going to go back because they've got some acts coming up in the next 2 months that I'd like to see, especially free of charge. But, Peter Frampton, I'm not a huge fan of. Obviously, the hits that everyone knows are awesome. They're definitely staples of classic rock. And he played those. He played a little instrumental version of Black Hole Sun. Didn't sing the lyrics, but just played. It was pretty cool. Good to see him. I've never seen him live, so definitely cool to mark off the list. Now, Cheap Trick, the third time I've seen them, one of the best live bands I've ever seen. They have that Tesla thing that kind of, when we gave a review of that show, that they just sound so fucking good live. My buddy, we were walking across the street, and they had just started their first song. We were just a few minutes late. And I said, "Oh, that's Cheap Trick." And he said, "No, man, that's not live. That's that doesn't sound live." And I was like, "Yeah, that's definitely them," and they were out there playing. They just sound so good, so close to the records, that you used to. And they played all the big hits, a couple lesser-known things, but they sound so good, put on a good show. Nothing crazy or fancy, just good music. Would highly recommend if you get a chance to see them, or anybody listening gets a chance to do that, because they're just badass. Definitely underrated. Somebody that I just think a lot of people just kind of forget about, but so many awesome songs.
They were really the proto band to the whole 80s hair metal movement. Their really bigger years were like in the late 70s.
Yeah, definitely. And they had they had the big, huge ballad in the 80s, which every band did, but, The Flame, which it was actually written for them, and I've read and heard before that they're not a fan of that song, and I know they went years before without playing it just because it wasn't like their song. But that's an awesome song, man. Like that's one of the best ballads ever, and luckily they played it. They played Voices, which interesting too. I looked at their set list from a couple shows before, and they really kind of mix it up. A lot of bands don't do that. So I didn't see Voices on one of the sets, and I was like, oh, man, I love that song. I'm going to play it. And then they broke into it, and it was awesome. They were just totally kick-ass. I got tickets for like $20. Can't beat that.
No.
It was awesome. The venue, definitely going to go back. I know Skinner's coming up, ZZ Top, Janet Jackson playing. I saw it's already sold out, and I'm sure it would be just packed around that. But that's, especially if she's playing some old stuff, I would totally be down for seeing that. But I bet it's going to be a madhouse because, like I said, it is a smaller place. A couple other shows that I'm looking forward to going up there and seeing.
Cool. Well, yeah, always good to hear a new venue is opening up. And, just within driving distance gives you a new option for concerts. We don't get hardly shit in Chattanooga. That's improved a little bit with the opening of Track 29 and then some of the other establishments bringing in some bigger acts just to try to compete with them. But still, we don't have that amphitheater where we get the big tours. So, it's either Nashville or Atlanta. And so anytime you get a new venue at one of those places, it's awesome. Glad to hear it was great. I like Frampton and Cheap Trick both. I'm not like a diehard fan of either band, but I would have definitely gone. It was one of those types of things where, I would definitely check them off the list to say I'd seen them. And, good to hear that.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say good to hear that Cheap Trick's still sounding great. It's amazing that all these bands that lived through this hard partying period of music are still out there kicking. They're pickled.
Yeah, man, 40 plus years, and God, Robin, God, he sounded so good. I was very impressed there. But another good thing is, man, the traffic. It was non-existent. I was out of there after the show and on the interstate in 5 minutes. It was awesome because of the location, just the parking's just really spread out. But definitely cool. Definitely excited about going back. So what have we got on tap this week?
All right. Well, before we get to our featured segment this week, we'll talk about what's going on at Empire Wrestling. This episode will be airing this coming Sunday night. So Empire Ladies Night will have just happened, and the big event on August 29th will be coming up on us. So probably want to talk a little bit about that. Also, just want to briefly mention the Scenic City Invitational home video will be released September the 1st, and you can catch that at Woo Wrestling. Go to facebook.com/Woo Wrestling or facebook.com/Empire Wrestling or empirewrestling.net for more details on how to purchase your copy. Will be available on DVD and video on demand.
Man, woo wrestling in Georgia. A lot of wooing going on in Georgia these days in the independent wrestling. Some good, some bad. I don't know.
Yeah, that you can say that again. I ain't even gonna go into it because it's gonna take up the whole fucking episode, and we got better things to talk about. But yeah, if you know what we're talking about, then you know.
Yeah, but like you said, this is going to air the week before August 29th. We're going to have a big Empire show. Already got the card set, 7 huge matches and a Midnight Black Mass segment. Definitely can't miss. Big rematch from the last show with the Hatriots versus Livewire Entertainment. Hatriots, pulled some dirty tricks out of the book, got an upset, or not an upset win, but an underhanded win, trying to see who's going to be number one contender for those Empire Tag Team titles going into the next mega event, Chasing the Grail. The Baniac going to get his junior heavyweight title match against Ryan Vega. And speaking of the White Rose, they're going to be in action facing Team IOU, Kerry Awful and Nick Iggy. So that match should be, very interesting to see. To my knowledge, first time those two teams have faced off. Bobby Moore is going to be going up against Joey Lynch. We saw Bobby Moore against Gunnar Miller the last time we were at Empire, and seems to be a lot of fishy stuff going on with Bobby Moore. First him and Ace Rockwell, and with him and Gunnar Miller, not just trying to score a victory, which he rarely tries to do anyway, but it seems he's trying to hurt these guys, and we all know Bobby's reputation for being the hit for hire. So, it seems to me that somebody's writing the checks here. Not really sure who, but Tank will be returning against Rush, and these men have faced off in the past. They have quite the history, and that match is always a can't miss. Logan Alvey's going to face KT Hamill after going back-to-back shows against Keith Hamill. KT asked for a match against Logan, also a non-title, but again, if KT could pull off a victory, he would definitely be in line for a title shot. And you're going to be talking to two, Matt Fortune and Steve Dave in the Midnight Black Mass, and I know how you love those guys, especially Steve Dave.
You're just lining up my favorites left and right. And now I have a new job, and I can't even knock Steve Dave on his ass. I just have to listen to him smell like dog shit and spit on me.
Well, bring some Tic Tacs and an umbrella, and you should be good to go.
Giving that motherfucker no Tic Tacs.
Man, Tic Tac stock would go up so much if you were trying to cure his bad breath, man. You'd be going through them. You'd be going through Tic Tacs like they were fucking, Tic Tacs. And also, young rookie upstart Chase Jordan's going to be returning to Empire since making his debut at Crazy from the Heat. This guy's got a lot of buzz from him, especially for somebody who's been in the business for less than a year, and he's going to be going one-on-one with The Show. Very interesting. I guess interesting is the word when describing The Show. So, I'm looking forward to this show, and this is the last stop before September 12th when we go back to every Saturday night live wrestling action at 22 Austin Avenue in Rossville, Georgia.
Big things coming. So, again, big event, August 29th, Saturday night, 8:05 p.m. bell time. Again, Facebook.com/Empire Wrestling, EmpireWrestling.net. And, again, what was that date? September the 12th?
September 12th when we go back to every Saturday night. The next show is going to be August 29th, though.
Yes, September 12th is when the new fall season begins, going weekly at the Empire Arena, 22 Austin Avenue, Rossville, Georgia. Again, you can also find Empire Wrestling on Twitter at EmpirePW, and you can find myself there on Twitter at Dragons Rejects. Give us a follow, say hello, or tell us to go fuck ourselves. We really don't care. Now it's time for the featured segment this week. Reading the old Gary Hart book is like, I love when I read something or, watch something or just, because wrestling's very easy. We've talked about this many times. You get a love-hate relationship going on with wrestling a lot of times when you've been in it for as long as we have. And so there's times where you just look at it like a fucking job and you don't want to fucking think about it outside of the time you're fucking doing it. And then there's other times that you, like I say, you read something or you watch something that kind of rekindles your love for it. And that Gary Hart book certainly just sucked me back into wrestling fandom. I've been watching a ton of World Class, around the time that he was talking about where he was booking, you could just to see some of the stuff he was talking about in action. And, of course, that brings us to the topic we're going to cover this week, which I just wanted to get back on a wrestling topic. So we're going to talk about another Playing Favorites edition of Midnight Black Mass. We're going to do top 5 this time, our top 5 personal favorite tag teams of all time. Before we get into that, I just have to share one final thing about the Gary Hart book. It had one of my most recent favorite quotes in all of wrestling that I've ever heard, and you will appreciate this as a booker, because he was talking about being a booker and everybody pitching their ideas and taking credit for different gimmicks and things that got over. His quote was, "Well, as a booker, success has many fathers, but failure is always a bastard."
Ain't that the truth?
And I said, yeah, that describes a good bit of most bookers' careers that I know. So without further ado, our top 5 tag teams. Now, do you want to go in reverse order here? I know we went starting at number 1 the last time, but I think with the tag teams, I was a little more easily able to define who and where in the top 5. So I could go backwards this time if you wanted to.
Yeah, we can do that. I think we do need to mention, like our last list, this isn't necessarily the 5 greatest tag teams of all time, because that's highly debatable, and I would probably make some adjustments myself. But this is just our personal favorites, just our team that we either grew up watching or that we like to watch now. We like their ring work, we like their gimmick, their look, their merchandise, just a team that we're marks for.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, a team that touched us in a way. With me, I always try to think of like modern teams to add or modern people to put on these lists, and it's not a slight to them, but like wrestling just affected me so much in those formative years that it's hard to stay outside of that 70s and 80s period of wrestling. That you go back and you look at just, how great it was, and not that it wasn't great in the 90s or isn't great now in its own ways, but just like to me, unfortunately, I tried, but all of my tag teams came out of the 80s, so just a fair warning.
Yeah, and another thing, tag team wrestling has definitely changed, and there's been spurts where it's been they've tried to bring it back, or some teams have got together and worked really hard, and there's been some really good teams come along in the past 10, 15, 20 years. The longevity's not there like it used to be, obviously, but there's been some good teams that people forget about or may write off, but I too mostly went with some more classic teams, not really for the modern era. And it's interesting because my list was kind of easy to put together, but in pairs it was difficult. Like I had a 5 and a 6, like who was just outside 5, and then 3 and 4 was difficult, and 1 and 2 was difficult. So hopefully we don't have the exact same people on our list, but I guess I could get started if you want me to.
Go right ahead.
Well, this was one I debated about it, and I kind of gave number 5 just a little bit of a push not because of their work style, which not that they weren't, great workers, but they weren't just kind of exactly the type of guys I like to watch a lot, but I really dug their look and their character, and somebody I'd get excited about, anytime I'm talking about now. A team that was kind of accused and may have been the WWE's version of the Road Warriors, but I got to give number 5 spot to the Legion of Doom, featuring Animal and Heidenreich. Okay, I'm kidding. Okay, but the rest of the description was accurate. My number 5 team is LOD 2000, featuring Animal and Dawes. Okay, all seriousness. My number 5 team, obviously, the Axe and the Smash, Demolition. First ever 3-time WWF Tag Team Champions. Bill Eadie, very accomplished. Barry Darsow, coming over from the NWA. A lot of people say that was kind of the Vince McMahon's version of the Road Warriors, and that could be true, but I just always dug those guys, man. They had a great look. They had badass entrance music, and so I got to give the number 5 spot to them.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, like, Bill was considered a great worker for many years as a mass superstar. He was a headliner in many territories and drew a lot of money. And then so they pair him up with Barry Darsow, who's not known as a great, like, technical wrestler, but he was a very good worker. He was had the Crusher Darsow run in Mid-South and NWA, and is then turned into Smash, into Demolition, or it was even Crusher Khrushchev when they went full Russian with him. And but he found that huge success teaming with Bill Eadie as Axe, and I, like you said, I love the tag team. They just barely eked out of my list, but they were definitely in contention for the number 5 spot. Great dudes too. I've actually got to spend a little bit of time with them, especially Bill Eadie over the years, and just what an amazing dude who just imparts his knowledge to the younger generation and is such a classy gentleman. And just, dude, loved him so much as a kid. Never really got, like, I can see the Road Warriors comparisons, but they were definitely their own act that had their own thing going on. Yeah,
and I think from a worker standpoint, I think maybe they were a little bit stronger workers than the Road Warriors. The Road Warriors kind of had that killer thing where they just come in and destroy guys, but that's the Road Warriors. They just, I get why everyone loves them and thinks they're an amazing team, but I just prefer Demolition, just growing up on them and just a lot of different reasons. But who's your number 5?
My number 5 is one of my absolute favorite stables of all time. They may rank number 1 if we're ranking stables, but just in terms of tag teams, held plenty of tag team championships all across the world and many different combinations thereof. the fabulous Freebirds. You know, you had the version of Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy as a tag team. My personal favorite would have been the Mid-South version, where Hayes was more the manager and six-man partner, and the two stronger workers in Terry Gordy and Buddy Jack Roberts were the tag team. Some tremendous stuff from down there. But then also even the later version of the Freebirds with Michael Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin doing kind of the 80s hairband gimmick. Any and all incarnations of the Freebirds, except for maybe the one with Iceman King Parsons, the new Freebirds in Dallas when Hayes had left. Maybe not that version, but, you know, all well-known versions of the Freebirds are absolutely one of my favorite tag teams of all time.
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny the Freebirds at all. I've had this conversation with Tank, and he always just thinks it's blasphemy, and I guess I could see that. But I personally, I kind of prefer the fabulous Freebirds with Jimmy Garvin and Michael Hayes, like you said. You know, they had that cool hairband thing going, very glammed out, which obviously I'm a fan of, and you know, they were strictly a tag team. They didn't have the six-man thing. You know, they added Bad Street there a little bit, which I thought was really cool as well, but that didn't last a long time. Worked a lot as babyface and heel in the late NWA and early WCW, and I just kind of lean towards them a little bit more as just as who I would mark out for, but definitely, I mean, you can't deny what they did as a group before that, and hopefully to God that those guys go into the Hall of Fame next year in Dallas, and I think you slide Jimmy Garvin in there too. I know some of that stuff kind of gets debated about, but you know, he was an important part too, but you know, hopefully they do something for them. With WrestleMania being in Dallas, it's got to be time for these guys to go into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that one's so long overdue. And as far as the hairband version, you know, like, of course, the original trio of the Fabulous Freebirds is one of the greatest the greatest acts in the history of wrestling, like, just as a unit they were. And so they headlined everywhere they went. And then the hairband version, the early 90s, late 80s version of Hayes and Garvin, were not headliners. They were guys that knew that their days were running down, and they were happy to work on the lower to middle end of the card and get other guys over. They had some great matches with the Southern Boys when they first brought them in and really helped establish them as a tag team. And, you know, they like I said, they were opening match guys for the most part, but, you know, people never forgot the Freebird legacy. And, you know, the fans didn't really, I think, let it taint it because they were over the entire time, whether it was as a babyface or a heel. And, you know, it was just a nice, like I said, it wasn't the Freebirds in the 80s in their prime on top selling out the fucking Superdome or Reunion Arena in Dallas, but it was definitely a very entertaining act. And like I said, to me, it just falls under the whole umbrella of the history of the Freebirds. And they're, you know, the very few acts have influenced me like the Freebirds, and that's all incarnation.
Yeah, and real quick, you know, we can't go into this, and it's hard to describe, but, you know, people that know, they know the difference, and they know when they see it. But there's a big difference in the style you work when you're a main eventer and when you're selling the tickets and when you're...
Well, I don't think a lot of guys do fucking know that anymore, but that's another rant altogether.
Well, I'm aware. I mean, there's a clear difference, you know, between when you're a main eventer and the style you work and what you do, and when you're in some of the earlier card matches and the style you know that you do in those situations. And they're both difficult, and they're both have pros and cons, but I just kind of prefer that style of, you know, that kind of mechanical style with the opening cards. Nothing, I mean, obviously guys main eventing are selling the tickets and drawing the money, but, and you can see great main event matches, obviously, but that's what you kind of got. The Freebirds against the Von Erichs was a lot of heat, a lot of drama. But your Freebirds against the, you know, the Young Pistols, the Wild Out Southern Boys, you know, whatever, Rock and Roll Express, Doom, you know, some of these tag teams, completely different thing. And I've just always enjoyed those matches a little bit more. So maybe that's why I lean towards them as well.
Hell yeah. Well, what about number 4?
See, number 4 and number 3 for me are tough. And I almost bumped this team to number 3, but I couldn't do it from just a mark point of view, just a merchandising and just digging them. And obviously you'll understand once we get to number 3. But my number 4 pick is Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, the Rockers. Awesome team. Mostly babyface. I mean, I had a heel run in the AWA, but mostly known for their babyface work. Badass team, looked awesome, looked great, had that just awesome 80s cool dude look going. Entrance music, the look, the double team, the gimmick, the merchandise, everything is just, badass top to bottom. 2 awesome workers, obviously. Shawn Michaels became fucking Shawn Michaels. And the what's the saying, every team has a Marty Jannetty. It's accurate, but it's totally an unfair statement because Marty Jannetty was so fucking good, and Shawn Michaels will admittedly say that he carried the tag team, because he had a little more experience. And I think Marty he could have had kind of that babyface 90s run opposite of Michaels' heel run if, he kind of didn't mess that up himself. They definitely tried a couple times, but I think he kind of blew that. But, my number 14, the Rockers, man, they're awesome.
Yeah, I loved the Rockers as a kid, especially. They were so much fun to watch. We'll compare with the Rock and Roll Express coming up here in a little bit, I'm sure, because they're definitely going to appear on my list as well. But the Rockers did not. They slightly got edged out because I didn't feel it was right to put Rock and Roll Express and the Rockers on there because they're so similar, and the Rockers are basically just like a younger, better-looking, more athletic version of the Rock and Roll Express. But they also didn't draw the money the Rock and Roll Express did, so I was like, okay, well, if you got 2, they're so similar, the originators got to get it. But man, they were so fucking good as a team, and they were just a phenomenon in the early 90s. And, they decided to run with Shawn. Both of the guys were hellions during that time, so Shawn just got lucky that he got in the right people's ear, I think, because, I don't think he was raising any less hell than Marty in those days.
Yeah, you're probably right. Maybe he could just kind of handle it personally himself, but yeah, and I see what you're saying about the Rock and Roll Express, but we'll definitely get into that, I'm sure, sooner rather than later. So who's your number 4?
Number 4, and I know this one's probably going to cross on your list, so maybe give us a good opportunity to just both talk about it right now. It's probably number 1 on your list, but I'm not going to speculate. The Hart Foundation, man, the only WWF team, primarily. There's teams that work there, but the only that was known exclusively as a WWF team that made my list. In an era where their tag teams were good. I mean, you had the British Bulldogs who were fucking great. You had the Demolition, as you'd mentioned. You had the Rougeaus and the Killer Bees. I mean, you had a great crop of tag teams in the 80s at the WWF. But the Hart Foundation were just this quintessential tag team. They had this unique dynamic of the big power guy and the technician. They wrestled as a tag team. There's just one thing, and they did it even in the WWF, which, wasn't necessarily known for, like, the long, drawn-out NWA-style tag team matches that I'm such a fan for. But the Hart Foundation did those kind of matches there. And I just fucking love their mechanics, the way they cut the ring in half, the way they did double teams, the stories they told psychologically. You put the Hart Foundation on, and I'm glued no matter what.
Absolutely. And obviously, if anybody knows me, but obviously if you heard the top 10 list we did, Bret Hart, my favorite wrestler, no close second there. The Hart Foundation is not my number 1 team. The Hart Foundation is my number 3 team on the list. And,
interesting.
Yeah, almost gave the Rockers the nudge. Just I enjoy. It's tough. The Rockers, I think I could enjoy all of their matches, and the Hart Foundation could occasionally have 1 or 2 where it would be like not as good, like maybe the Bolsheviks or a team like that. But very, 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 very close. But if you give me a Sweet Hart Foundation T-shirt or a Rockers T-shirt, I'm going to pick the Hart Foundation one because Bret's there. But like you said, I mean, you can't deny this team. Jim Neidhart's in that Marty Jannetty, in that Marty Jannetty conversation where he wasn't as good as Marty Jannetty, I would say, but this is an underrated guy. Jim Neidhart was really good in that role. I think, Bret Hart's admitted he too carried the Hart Foundation with the promos, with maybe not so much the in-ring work, even though he did carry his own. Just kind of the presence, being out there. The Fed was a big man territory in the 80s. It always has been, but in the 80s especially. Neidhart a lot bigger than Bret Hart. And I think those guys are kind of, you got some teams that are very similar, two guys that are very similar. But on the flip side of that, sometimes you get a team where the two guys are very opposite. And those guys are kind of the textbook definition of that team, where you have, like they used to say, the Ferrari and the tank. Jim Neidhart being the big powerhouse, hard-hitting, Bret Hart, the more agile, quick, technical wrestler. So they were kind of, if you were to combine them, you would kind of have that perfect guy. So they worked so well as a tag team. As a heel team with Jimmy Hart, they were on top of the world, kind of in arguably the biggest point in professional wrestling, around that WrestleMania 3 time. They were tag team champions. Awesome matches with the Bulldogs, among others, but those matches really just stand up over time, and their babyface run was awesome too. Shane Neidhart kind of didn't get as much after the split. Not saying that he would have been a world champion, but I just think he could have had some stuff to offer. But yeah, that's my number 3 pick. Kind of shocking, huh?
Yeah, that is kind of shocking, because I thought for sure they'd be number 1 for you. But a very interesting point about Anvil kind of being the star of the team in the 80s. Not that Bret was obviously holding up his end and, had the sunglasses and huge star himself. But, it's interesting comparing, like, the way wrestling is perceived now versus then, because obviously now everybody would be all over Bret because he was the great technician, and they would kind of shit on the Anvil because he was a big power guy. But in the 80s, when everybody didn't fucking know shit, the fucking guy with stroking his beard that had the fucking evil laugh and gave the mean shoulder tackle was the guy that people were fucking raring to see. And it was kind of the same way in the Steiners, Scotty was like the fucking younger brother who was kind of quiet and did all the crazy cool moves, and Rick just fucking barked and pretended like he was going to piss on people and dropped them on their head, and people fucking loved him.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing, the double team moves are always huge, and there probably isn't a double team finish that's been kind of ripped off in one way, shape, or form more than the heart attack. That's something to look at, and then a lot of different ways you can break it down. I always when we had our short stint or year-plus stint as teaming as the Devil's Rejects with me and Tank at Empire, that was definitely always in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, man, this is like officially my version of the Hart Foundation, because I have this big guy who can really go, even the fucking beard similarities. I got this big guy that can really go, and I'm in there, taking the bumps and putting I mean, not that, we weren't on the same levels by any means, but I just thought it was like my finally had that chance to kind of be in that position where I had this big, huge brawler, kick-ass dude and Tank, and then me, just this little chicken shit heel, running away from everybody, taking all the bumps and stuff. So that was definitely cool. So who was your number 3?
My number 3, and this is one I struggled with because it's almost like you could rank, especially if you're going top 5 babyface tag teams, these guys to me would be number 1 without a doubt. The Rock and Roll Express. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the Rockers and how they were kind of the younger, better-looking version of the Rock and Roll, but they also weren't as seasoned and weren't quite the masters of psychology and things that Ricky and Robert were. The quintessential babyface tag team, and so ahead of their time. The Rockers were very ahead of their time, and in the same vein the Rock and Roll Express was. I mean, they were doing moves that didn't become really popular or commonplace until the mid to late 90s, and even then by like luchadors, but not just that, just the true art of tag team wrestling there, where you had Ricky, the quintessential babyface in peril. It wasn't always him, Robert would take the heat from time to time, but Ricky Morton, the bloodied babyface and getting beat down, by whether it's the Andersons or the Russians or any other heel tag team, the Midnight Express in particular, and making that great acrobatic escape with his last gasp to make the hot tag, and they come in and clean house. And like they just told a story with their tag team matches that are pretty well unparalleled. But just like the crowd reactions, and I've gotten to know both of them decently well over the years. Ricky a little bit better than Robert. But the stories they tell, and I think some of the young guys sitting around don't really believe them because they tell these tall tales all the time. It's like, it was like the goddamn Beatles, man. We walked around there with girls lined up around the building waiting to meet us, like fucking, and it was true. I mean, if you watch the tapes or any of the fucking backstage stuff from that time or the promos or any of like the press stuff with them coming to the buildings, I mean, it was like Beatlemania in the South during the 80s for those guys. It was unfucking precedented, and no babyface has reached that level of popularity. I mean, even a Rock of Steve Austin, like so much more popular on a mainstream level, but as far as like that deep connection where those people loved you and lived and fucking died with you, the Rock and Roll Express are hard to fucking beat.
Oh, definitely, man. And it's crazy. That was like my number when I said number 5 and 6 was tough. Rock and Roll Express didn't make my list, but the only reason is because if I would sprout out my top 5 tag teams, I'd say 1 through 4, and I'd say Rock and Roll Express. But every time I would say them, I'd be like, man, I love Demolition. They were just so cool and shit. So I just edged them out just because of the cool factor and the look and the presentation and stuff. But, man, you can't deny the work, the selling of those two, but especially Ricky Morton. You can't even describe it. Like, I don't even know if you can teach it. Like, there's so few people. There's some great guys that can really sell their ass off and make you feel for them and make you believe that they're in so much pain. And then when they make the comeback, that they just hit that next gear and just fired up and everything, and you believe it. Ricky Steamboat's probably probably a 1A to Ricky Morton, but oh man, he's just unbelievable in that aspect. And like you said, the business was so different. It was more of a one-on-one connection that you could have with the crowds because, you did some of the same towns, and it wasn't worldwide, nonstop all the time. It was nonstop, but I mean, you would hit up some of the same locations, and you could kind of build that rapport with people, and the fans would just feel like they knew you and they loved you and they cared about you. But yeah, the Rock and Roll, man, I mean, arguably the greatest babyface tag team of all time, for sure.
Yeah, and awful hard to argue, like I say, when you think of it just almost being like Beatlemania in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1985. Just a really special magic in space and time. We talk about that phrase a lot here on the show, but definitely they were part of a true magic in space and time. Just like Ricky Morton, we talk about his selling. He would look and make eye contact with all the little girls in the front row, and he would mouth "help me" to them as he's fucking reaching out. I remember there was like a cornet shoot or something where he was talking about, they're like in fucking Mid-South where the crowds would get really hot and fucking want to riot at the drop of a fucking hat. And he's like doing that. He's like, "Stop it, Ricky! They don't need their fucking help. They're coming."
Yeah, I've heard about where Cornette's the only thing between the crowd and the ring, and the crowd's just moving in closer and closer, and they're like basically grabbing Cornette. I mean, God, if you could recreate that now, man, it would be amazing. And I don't know if we'll ever see those days again. Really, it'd be really tough. No, there's another story I got to tell real quick that Ricky always tells about him and Dr. Death in like Houma, Louisiana, I think it was. And like fucking, he was working, like Dr. Death was the fucking Mid-South champion, I think, at the time. And, Rock and Roll were just at the fucking height of their popularity, and Doc's a heel. And Ricky's this tiny baby face against the monster Steve Williams, this fucking straight, like that was his prime too, right out of Oklahoma, just a fucking beast, and this little fragile Ricky Morton in there fucking scrapping away with him, and fucking, of course Dr. Death was supposed to win because he was the fucking champion, but like he's getting the heat on Ricky, and apparently Ricky's like got the color, and
it's like the people are fucking inching up closer and closer to the fucking ring, trying to help Ricky. And he's got her fucking like bear hug, and Ricky's, just fucking selling his ass off. And Dr. Death goes, "Small package me, motherfucker." And he's like, "What?" He's like, "Small package me." He goes, "You're the champ, brother. You're supposed to go over." He says, "Small package me, you son of a bitch." And he had to fucking small package him and beat him because the people were in the fucking ring ready to goddamn cut Dr. Death if he fucking beat Ricky.
That's awesome.
So, talk about baby faces. It's hard to beat that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, man, that's great. Oh, so where are we at, number 2?
Getting down the list here.
Man, like I said at the beginning, man, mine went in pairs. Really hard to pick, and they're my number 2 right now. You could ask me tomorrow, and I might make them number 1. You could ask me in a month, depending on if I watched something or if I saw something. I might make them number 1. It's so hard for me, and I can't even describe what gives my number 1 team the edge, really. But number 2 on my list is, we just talked about a little bit, the Midnight Express, managed by Mr. James E. Cornette. And I lean a little bit towards Bobby Eaton, Beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan. The work is unbelievable. Bobby Eaton, probably the greatest tag team wrestler of all time, most likely. It's arguably. The gear, matching gear, they had cool entrance robes, entrance jackets, what have you, the music, Cornette, and Cornette was such a different type of manager. He got physically involved a lot, not just with little, heat spots and things such as that, but he would get drug in the ring and do different kind of spots and, take a good bump occasionally and just stuff like that. Those guys are just awesome, so ahead of their time. No one's even really come close to kind of duplicating their style and the way they worked in the ring. Definitely have to give them the number 2 spot. And, like I said, they could easily be number 1 on any given day.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think anybody that knows me remotely well would know that I had to rate the Midnight Express number 1. I don't think there was a better act in the 80s, quite possibly, in terms of all of them, including Cornette. You had the 2 guys in the ring who could get it done. You had the guy on the mic who could get it done. You had this unique package and presentation, as you had mentioned. And I love both incarnations. Like, what you got with Dennis was more scrappy, like veteran heel. Dennis was a great worker, had a headline in Memphis and Pensacola and many other territories over the years, but paired, of course, with Bobby Eaton in Mid-South in the infamous trade with Memphis. The most one-sided trade in the history of wrestling, because Memphis got pretty well nobody they could use, and Bill Watts got all of the best talent in Memphis, including Bill Dundee as a booker. So I think they got Memphis got like a green, like Rick Rude first year in the business, who, looked great but didn't know much at the time, so he wasn't of much help to him. And Crusher Broomfield, who later went on to become the one-man gang, but also was very green at the time, so, was not the great that he would go on to become. But, yeah, the Midnight Express with Dennis was like a better worker psychologically, like Stan was super flashy and awesome. He's one of the only guys trained by Ric Flair. He was a really
the only guy,
unique...
I believe. Is there another guy? I think he's the only one.
I was thinking there was one more. Now that's going to haunt me. I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah, I have to look that up for sure.
But yeah, so at least one of the older guys, maybe the only guy trained by Ric Flair, and added a whole new sports entertainment element to the team. Like, I think that version of the Midnights could have probably made big money with action figures and merchandise in the WWF. With Dennis, he was just your old Southern dude looking guy. Not that he was fucking ugly or anything. He just Stan was like an Adonis and just super handsome, and all the women fucking loved him. And, it went perfectly with Bobby and his fucking smooth as silk in-ring stuff. And, they made magic every time they got in a ring, in my opinion. And, I could watch them to this day. even at their age now, they still go out there and can outwork three-quarters of the locker room. I've told that story before where I worked a show where them and the Rock and Rolls headlined it in like 2010, and it was still one of the most fucking amazing matches I'd ever seen, and they nearly took a bump. And you know, just fuck, I couldn't gush enough over the Midnight Express. One of the premier heel tag team. Like they're to me the archetype of a good heel tag team in terms of like learning how to work as a team, to get that heat, cut the ring off, and work in tandem, to not just look like two guys out here working a fucking singles match.
Absolutely. So I think we can agree that Bobby Eaton is kind of he's definitely the nucleus there, that glue that held that together, and just, you know, kept it running, and was always kind of the best part of it, no matter who he was in there with. Yeah, and that guy, man, you go back and watch, and like you said, yeah, I could watch their matches. Their matches hold up. They could go out there and work Primetime Players, Wolves, Kaz and Daniel, you know, any promotion, any team, any guys that are out there right now doing tag team wrestling, they could work them, and it would be amazing. No doubt about that. And, man, I've stole so many little simple spots from the Midnight Express. I mean, the simplest shit you can imagine. I stole from them back in the day, and have so many guys kind of gushing like, oh, man, that was so cool, man. How'd you come up with that? And I'm thinking, all you have to do is watch some of these guys, and you'll learn, no matter what the match is, you'll learn something new all the time. And that's, you know, the Midnight Express are, you know, they're two of those guys that you just always learn from. So that's crazy. So we spoiled it a little bit. That's your number one pick.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Okay.
So
uncontested.
Who's your number two pick? No close second, huh?
My number two, a pretty close second in turn. Like, in-ring was what it was, but, like, you just couldn't deny the fucking energy of the Road Warriors, man. You know, growing up as a kid in the 80s, if you're a kid now coming up and you're like, oh, I don't see what the big deal is about the Road Warriors, like, you weren't alive when they were the fucking baddest men on the planet. That's what I talked about a little bit earlier, about the perception of wrestling, how, you know, Rick Steiner or Jim Neidhart was the badass of the team in the 80s, and people weren't so damn particular about every little detail that happened in the ring. And, you know, the Road Warriors were the two biggest, baddest motherfuckers on the block, and everybody believed when that music hit and those motherfuckers came out, somebody was getting their dick ripped off.
Hell yeah, man. I mean, I'm a Road Warrior fan. I guess between not growing up on them as much, especially because my biggest exposure to them came when they came to the WWF, then WWF, and it wasn't the same. It was very weird. It kind of goes back to that theory that Vince McMahon doesn't love to use the creations that he did not create, you know, as well. But yeah, you can't deny the effect they had, and they kind of, you know, they were a team. There were little spurts where they weren't necessarily a team, but they didn't really break out to singles and things such as that. Always a team. When you think of Hawk, you think of Animal, and vice versa. Awesome promos, like promos way ahead of their time, and really some of their promos you'd go back and look at, and it was like some really dark stuff for the time, especially in that cartoon age of the early 90s Fed stuff, where they would say some stuff and you're like, Jesus Christ, like, that's going to give kids nightmares. But their matches, you know, like you said, they were what they were. It depends who they worked with. If they had a good bumping heel team that they wouldn't be afraid to sell for some heat and things such as that, you know, they had some awesome matches. The look, obviously, is, you know, badass with the shoulder pads and the spikes. Entrance music, they had several different themes over the years, all of which were awesome. Good catchphrase, you know, the whole nine. Yeah, man. And like Hawk was a pretty underrated worker. Not that Animal was bad. You know, he's your standard power guy and did those things and, like, you know, awesomely did them. Like, you know, he did everything he was supposed to do. But Hawk was a little wild in the ring, you know, and like he would come up with some crazy fucking moves and shit sometimes. It was just like such a crazy personality. Like Animal was more all business,
You know, he's like, we're going to take you, we're going to kick your ass, and you're going to be walking home to your mama. And Hawks, you know, the one that's well, you know what we hate besides everything?
There's two types of people in this world, weasels and weasel slappers. Guess which ones we are. It's like, what? But you clearly knew which type they were. And there's some promo I can't quote the promo, but there's some promo from, like, I think it was early 90s Fed. You know, they may have been tag champs or something, but they talk about, like, picking a booger. They're like, look at this booger, and you roll it around on your fingers, and it gets sticky, and you flick it off. And I'm like, what the fuck? But it was still awesome. It still translated to whoever we're facing, we're going to beat the dog shit out of you. And, you know, since we kind of, we hit your number one a little earlier, everything, we got a little bit of time. There's always been a bit, you know, if I could ask Vince McMahon questions, you know, this would be on my top 10 list for sure, because I've always wondered, what the fuck were you thinking? I never understood why they didn't. Not only did they not get more out of the Legion of Doom versus Demolition when that finally could have happened, they, you know, because that's like a WrestleMania match. You know, they build to WrestleMania 7, and the Legion of Doom faces Power and Glory, beats them in probably less than a minute, while Demolition faces two random Japanese wrestlers and puts them over in a lackluster match. Like, why the fuck? And I asked Bill Behrens this one time just to see if he had any insight, and he's like, I just don't think the matches were very good. Well, you had a 60-second squash with one team, and the match between Demolition and the two Japanese guys wasn't good at all. Why the fuck didn't you build that to like a loser leaves or a loser breaks up or you know, something? Because Demolition disappeared after WrestleMania 7.
Yeah, it was pretty much their last high-profile match in the company, and Bill Axe had already gone. You know, he had gotten hurt and had to leave, so it was just Dorso and Crush, and, you know, Smash and Crush. And so, you know, who were fine in that spot and, like, as heels, because, like, you know, Crush just had that fucking mean streak. He was pretty impressive at the time. And fucking, you know, the people would have bought that. But I don't know. They done some strange things like that. We talked about that on a few episodes ago at the WrestleMania 8, where they did, you know, Hogan and Flair all over the house show loop, and that was supposed to be the big match. And then they came back and claimed, well, it didn't draw as good as they'd hoped it would. So they decided not to do it. Now, maybe was it because the matches weren't good? Maybe they tried that with Road Warriors and Demolition on the loop, and maybe something happened and it just didn't work out. I don't know.
Well, I have theories about the Hogan and Flair thing, because, you know, Hogan was leaving and he couldn't leave as champion, and you didn't want to put him under, and, you know, a lot of things like that. But nothing makes sense for this, because even if, not that this is the way it should have played out, but even if you had two Japanese guys come over and face Power and Glory and do a 5-minute match, slide the Japanese guys over for whatever reason, there must have been some deal with the Japan Wrestling Company at the time. But you could have had the Road Warriors kill Demolition in less than a minute, like you did with Power and Glory. Not saying that's what I would have done, but you could have done it, and then boom, Demolition's gone. They disappear. The Road Warriors are the baddest shit on the planet because they destroyed Demolition in 60 seconds at WrestleMania. Like, I don't understand. It's one of the biggest puzzling questions in booking history that I would have, just because I see no way where it makes sense.
No, it's like they blew it off at the Survivor Series. Like, they never really had that big pay-per-view match. You know, it's like they kind of started the feud at SummerSlam that year when the Road Warriors helped Hart Foundation win the belts. And then in Survivor Series, Road Warriors were on the Ultimate Warriors team, where Demolition was on the other side, and they just whipped their asses. So I guess that was the blow-off, which is kind of dumb. But, you know, who are we to question a multi-million-dollar company, I guess?
I guess so, but that's if all the questions to ask Vince McMahon, that would be very high on my list. He'd be like, "What the fuck kind of question is that?" But I've just got to know. I don't get it. But that's just you know, if anybody's got any insight on that, I would love to hear it for sure. Because, and you know, I did hear one time that maybe that they had a trouble, like nobody wanted to sell, like, you know. Probably Crush didn't have much of an opinion, but definitely Axe and Smash were probably like, we're not gonna put these guys over and make them look like $1 million. And Hawk and Adam were probably like, fuck those guys, they're impersonators. We're not gonna sell for them, But yeah, I don't know. But okay, well, we got your number one pick, the Midnight Express, which is an amazing pick. They're 1A. Actually, it's not even fair to say they're number 2 on my list. They're like 1.5. So, and I think we've left out so many teams, man. We could have a most underrated teams list, or there's a million things we could do because tag team wrestling's always been my favorite.
Yeah, after we wrap up with this final pick here, I think we can spend a minute or two on like some of the honorable mention teams that definitely could be on the list.
Yeah, so I'm curious. Do you have any idea who my number one team is?
Man, after going down the list, I'm guessing maybe the Bulldogs.
No, very good team for sure. But my favorite team is very unique because you have a lot of times you have a tag team and they break up, maybe both. Usually one of the guys becomes big singles guys. And sometimes you can have a good successful team out of 2 single guys, but it's not always a good fit because there is a strong difference in tag team wrestling and singles matches. But my favorite team of all time, whether you call them the Horsemen or whether you call them the Brainbusters, has to be Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard.
Oh, hell yeah.
I mean, they had, if they had JJ, they had Bobby Heenan, 2 of the greatest. I mean, I say Bobby Heenan is the greatest manager of all time. But, man, that style, they would bump their ass off. They would sell. They would cheat. I mean, they would give the babyface so much. They would cheat to get over. They would cheat to win if they did. Just, such easy. And they did the easiest stuff, but it mattered. It made so much sense. Go back and watch those matches where they team band against so many people. They got a match at the beginning of, I want to say, Great American Bash 88 against Sting and Nikita, the opening match. Dude, it's fucking phenomenal. Like, I can watch it every day and never get tired of it.
Yeah, the fucking Brainbusters, the Horsemen, I mean, they were definitely, like, I struggled not putting them in my top 5 for sure. They were, when we're going to talk about honorable mention, they definitely would have been in there. Maybe my favorite heel team to watch outside of the Midnight Express in the 80s, but also, like, they were just no nonsense, fucking, like, old school, like, pick a body part apart, just the quintessential wrestling tag team, not, like, the Midnight Express, were very new wave, very ahead of their time. The Brainbusters were right on time, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think they could. But they're guys that could go out there today and work with any team like the Midnights could, and pretty much probably like almost every team we've mentioned here today, I think could do that. Go out there now and just any era and any generation. Because let's face it, there's guys that are amazing that are just badass workers, could tell a story, but it doesn't always mean that they're going to be able to go out there right now on TV for the way the wrestling business is and the way the crowds are, what they're accustomed to seeing, and it convey and it cross over. And that's not a knock on anybody. It's just, things are different. Times are insanely different. But Arn and Tully, man, especially as a team, but I mean singles too, but they could go out there right now, wrestle anybody, and it would be over. It'd be over like $1 million.
Yeah, without a doubt, one of the greatest ever. And yeah, you say Bobby Heenan is the greatest manager of all time. That's pretty much a general consensus among managers. Even if we have our favorites that might not be Bobby, you can't deny he was the best. Mm-hmm. And of course, JJ is right up there too.
Yeah, I mean, even like a Cornette, who's an arguable mention, like he just say, and I've heard J.J. Dillon say it too. They don't even hesitate. They're like, Bobby Heenan's the best manager of all time. You just can't even argue in it because he was a great performer too and took great bumps. And, he was just perfect. That's another thing. That's almost a show we can't even have because it's so obvious that, we'd probably both pick around the same guys, but Bobby Heenan's always, he's got to be number one. But J.J. Dillon brought so much to that too. And, and luckily they got the short time they had in the Fed, which was, just over a year or so. They had some good teams to work with. They had a good pay-per-view match with the Hart Foundation. They had other various good matches, but man, go back and find a lot of the house shows, some of the Madison Square Garden shows, matches they had with the Rockers. Oh my God, dude! It's like it's amazing.
Yeah,
they were back in those days. I'm pretty sure they were working. Which a lot of I think the Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation did this a lot too. But I think they were working the main events on all the shows. Hogan or Warrior or whoever, they were going midway and going 5-10 minutes and going home, and then these guys are going out there for Maine and going 30 minutes every night.
Yeah, no, that's a fact. In the old house show days, and they have a bunch of them up on the network. You can see it for yourself. The main event usually goes on right before intermission. I think that's probably twofold. A, so the kids can see Hogan, and then they can go home and go to bed if need be. And also, so Hogan can go get a fucking beer and say, fuck y'all.
And go cash some checks. I mean, the guys like Hogan, they were drawing the crowds, but, people, I've heard people, I've heard Michaels and Hart, mention in interviews that when people left, they were like, it was cool seeing Hogan, but that fucking tag match, that was where it was at,
Yeah, I hate that tag team wrestling is just such a dead art now. It's not dead. I mean, it's on life support. There's some good tag teams, but even the best tag teams today, they don't understand the storytelling aspect of it the way they should. Not that they don't do a good job, because they do, but man, there's so much to tag team wrestling that is just seemingly lost on the current generation.
I think a good team, and they're not my favorite team, but I think the Usos have done a great job. I know one of them's injured right now, but they've done a great job because it was like their dream wasn't to be world heavyweight champion. Their dream was to be the tag team champions. They wanted to be a tag team, and that's nobody wants to do that anymore, because nowadays the tag teams aren't going to make the big money. Where tag teams in the 80s could make main event type money, but nowadays that's just not going to happen. So obviously, if you've got a job, everyone's thinking, even if you're in a tag team, you're like, I got to get out of this. I got to get a singles push.
Yeah, it is like it wasn't.
That's how they're conditioned to think.
Sure, it wasn't uncommon in the 80s, like you just mentioned, for a tag team match to main event a show and perfectly carry a show where Hogan worked on the underneath, right? But nowadays, they wouldn't fucking put a tag, and I'm not talking John Cena and a fucking other main event star against two more main event stars. I'm talking about, a fucking tag team match that's a tag team feud that has heat that people are invested in and care about. They wouldn't dare put that on the main event. And they should. They should give those guys a fucking chance, because they're not going to get to that level if they don't get the opportunity. But like you said, I guess they just don't see money in the tag teams because Kevin Dunn or whoever the fuck don't like tag teams. But, man, they can suck a dick.
And someone got wised up and was just kind of thinking, why do we pay 4 guys huge money when we can pay 2 guys huge money, and that be kind of the deal. But the thing is the tag team matches are different. And I mean, for the most part, they're always going to be different. If you see 2 tag matches on a card, you probably see 5 or 6 singles matches. So there's more of a chance to be different and be unique in that situation. And, it's another thing that's lost. And I think today, I don't know if guys don't, like, for instance, I've said this before, and I think it's true. No tag teams do double team tag moves anymore. Tag teams now do sequences where guy A will do something and guy B will follow it with something, and then guy A does something else, and it's like move, where no one does 2 guys attacking 1 guy with a double team move. Like, that's a lost thing. And that's a big deal. And just the whole style in general is just, it's really changed. And the thing is how many pay-per-views have happened in the past year or 2 years where it goes off and you're like, oh, maybe I'm biased, but I've seen so many where I'm like, yeah, the best match was the tag match. And, and Raw and SmackDown so many times have main event matches where it's not tag teams per se, where it's, a John Cena and a Roman Reigns or a Randy Orton, whether it be a tag, a 6-man or an 8-man. And the matches are good. And, you get a lot out of them. They're a lot different. But, it would be great to see. And they've had teams. They've had the Usos. I thought Cody and, Goldust and Stardust, either when they were doing that or even before when they were just kind of the Rhodes brothers. Those guys were, bad fucking ass. And you've got a guy like Goldust, who I think's the guy that gets overrated, or I'm sorry, not overrated, overlooked nowadays, where it's like, this guy knows how to work. Like, this guy he can wrestle if it's 1990 and he can wrestle if it's 2015, and, there's no gaps in it. So there's been some teams come along the pike, and and independent wrestling and other promotions as well, but that take pride in it and really know what they're doing. But they've had some opportunities with the Wyatt family and the Shield, some of those things, even though it was a 3-on-3 situation, same kind of scenario. They've had a lot of really good opportunities to say, to do something a little different every now and then, and put more of the focus on that type of a different type of match. But it's not like it was back in the day.
No, and another thing, tag team psychology requires a lot of cheating when you have a strong babyface heel dynamic, and that seems to be something they're so against these days. Like, you see so little heels cheating. I think there's like some kind of mentality that's some sort of Memphis thing. It's like, no, motherfucker, it's how you get heat.
It's life. That's life. You don't like people that cheat. Look at, guys use inflated footballs or deflated footballs in football and, shit like that, steroids, any of that stuff. You don't like people that cheat. That's the deal. That's the gimmick. Like, that's not Memphis. That's just life.
Why is everyone cheering Bray Wyatt? We need to get heat on him. We'll have him fucking start to heat the match by some other way than just fucking overpowering the guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, they see that and they go, well, he's a badass. He just fucking took over and whipped that dude's ass.
And I've worked so many matches, and I was real big on that. Like, I'm not gonna be in a match where it's like, how are we gonna take over them some heat? Oh, just to overpower them. No, fuck no, that is not how that happens. But I worked so many matches where that suggested, or where guys are working tag matches. I'm like, what are you doing to start the heat? And they're like, oh, well, he's gonna blah blah blah. And I'm gonna no. You've got a partner. You got a manager. You're doing a 6-man, so you got 2 partners. Like, you've got all these toys that you're wanting to ignore because it's easier. You're being lazier. Oh, I don't want to have to worry about these guys being in position. That's the fucking job. That's what we do. We tell those stories. We get people in the right positions. If that's not what you're wanting to do, then do something else. And another thing about tag wrestling, I think, and the businesses like this, it's a selfish business when you boil it down, but when you're in that position, I think you need to focus and say, okay, I'm doing this tag thing. We need to make it as strong as possible, make as much money as possible. And then if they want to do something else with one of us or both of us, so be it. But nowadays, people just want to be the singles guy. Whether, it could be on the smallest independent show. You could have freaking family members. You could have brothers, and you got one brother that's like, I'm the star of this team. It's like, no, you're not. Like, you're a team. Go out there and work together and be the best team you can be. Nobody wants to see just two teammates just jerking each other around to see who's the best singles guy in the match.
And also go where there's less fucking competition. And I don't mean that in terms of the wrestling promotion you're working for. I'm talking the business overall. And I tell guys this all the fucking time, and they don't listen, but if they did, they'd probably be making some fucking money, because the people seem to do a great job of making money off of my advice. I just can't seem to make any off of it. Find a guy who's willing to commit to the tag team and go all the way with it, because there's not many fucking tag teams. So if you're great at that, you're automatically going to stand out in the sea of millions upon millions of singles wrestlers. You're competing with a couple hundred tag teams, if that. So, your odds of being seen are drastically improved by just being something different than the same singles guys that they're seeing, because they're looking at a million singles guys. But there ain't a whole lot of guys who are willing to go all the way with the tag team and try to fucking take it as far as they can take it. And if they, the ones that do.
Yeah, I mean, like what you just said, okay, for guys listening or guys, wrestlers or fans, okay, think of Georgia. Can you name 10 really good singles wrestlers in Georgia? Of course you can. No problem. I can name 10 wrestlers right now. Boom. Good singles wrestlers in Georgia. Can you name 10 good tag teams in Georgia? Fuck no. And I don't mean
it'd be hard pressed.
Those guys are a pretty good team. I mean, like a really oh shit, that's a badass team. You can't name 10 in Georgia. There's no fucking way.
Yeah, it'd be like I could in like the last 10 years, but not that are currently active. Yeah.
2015, you might get 5. You ain't going to name 10. If you do, you're stretching your line.
Yeah, and there's some good ones, but you know, like it's about the commitment. You got to commit to the act. You got to commit. You're all in business together. You got to try to make money together. Like it's really not as hard as it seems. People try to complicate this shit way too much. But anyway, tag team wrestling, one of my absolute favorite forms of the art form, and really glad we got to do this here, top 5 countdown. Running out of time here. Any final thoughts on the tag team countdown? Playing favorites, volume 2.
No, I mean, I wish we got it ranting there a little bit. I wish we could pick, but we could talk all day about just underrated teams or teams that there's teams that people forget, not just the big teams. Like I always think of like a British Bulldog and an Owen Hart. Like they didn't have the match here and the name, but that was, and they were in a time where teams weren't as strong as a couple of years before, but there's a badass team. And shit, man, that we mentioned the British Bulldogs. That was an amazing team ahead of their time. I'm a big fan of the Twin Towers, the Big Boss Man and the Keem. I thought, for the time frame and what they were doing, like you just had 2 really big guys that, Akeem wasn't a sound worker and the one-man gang, and Big Boss Man, he was very green at the time, but man, I thought they did a hell of a job as being that role of, the 2 monster heels, and there's countless teams, Killer Bees, the Young Pistols, the Bobby Eaton and Arn Anderson teamed for like 30 seconds. Could you imagine if those guys had a run like that? That's the 2 best tag team wrestlers of all time, and they just didn't get the run that they needed to show. I can't imagine how good that team would have been, though.
Yeah, it was a highlight of that era for sure, and probably any era. You had lots of other Steiner Brothers, Hollywood Blondes, Edge and Christian. I always liked to watch the Eliminators, even though they were fairly short-lived in ECW. They were really unique for their time.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, you just, we're even forgetting guys that worked. There's sometimes makeshift teams or.
Like Tank and Iceberg, legitimately one of my all-time favorite tag teams also. Like they go up there with everybody, yeah.
Yeah, they were awesome. I've said before they could have had jobs now or when they were teaming, but I think in the 80s, like I think Akeem and Big Boss Man may have not even had a job if those guys were around. Those guys would have been working with Savage and Hogan,
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyway, but yeah, we can talk all night about tag teams, like you said. We're out of time tonight. Been a fun episode. I always like to dip back into the wrestling pool. We're doing plenty more of that and back to our usual hijinks as well. The great thing about this current format of the Midnight Black Mass, pretty much lets us do whatever the hell we want, and that's what suits us. So thanks for joining us. I'm the Rev Dan Wilson. For my co-host here, my brother Andrew Alexander, keep 1 foot in the gutter, 1 fist in the gold, 2 horns in the air, and if somebody crosses you, put a foot in that ass. Good night.
This has been a production of the Potty Humor Network. Find us online at youtube.com/Potty Humor or subscribe to us weekly and never miss an episode by searching Potty Humor on iTunes or Stitcher. Thank you for listening and good night.